board meeting on July 28th. As I call this meeting to order, I will remind all directors that since we are meeting via video conference call today, that in order to control background noise, please mute your computer or phone when you're not speaking. Please unmute yourself only when it's your turn to speak. You can find the mute button on the bottom left hand of your screen, but on my case, I'm with the tablet and it's the top right. When I call for a mover or seconder, you may indicate your wishes by saying your last name. After the item is moved and seconded, I will invite discussion on the topic. A director may indicate their desire to speak by saying their last name. I'll then take a list of speakers and call upon those speakers in order. When I call for the vote, only those opposed need to weigh in. Otherwise, it will be noted that you have voted in the affirmative. Votes in the negative will be recorded for the minutes. This meeting is being live web streamed. Following the meeting, the video will be available on the FPRD website for future viewing. This meeting is now called to order, and I'll turn things over to our CAO. What is the first order of business?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 2 is conduct of online meetings. There's a motion for your consideration.
And could we have someone move that, please?
Stevens.
Thank you.
Clute.
Thank you. Seconded by Clute. Thank you. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none. All in favor? Carried. Next item.
Next item is approval of the agenda, addenda, and late items.
Facio.
Thank you. That's moved by Director Facio, seconded by Director
Pranger.
Somebody's got their
Pranger.
Pranger,
Davidson.
thank you. Sorry, I was trying to find somebody with their hand up. Any discussion? Any objections? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Next item.
Next is 4.1. We have the draft Fraser Valley Regional Hospital District Board meeting minutes of June 23rd, 2020.
Thank you. Could I have those moved, please?
Davidson.
So I heard somebody move in the beginning, but I couldn't catch who it was, but I heard seconded by Davidson, Director Davidson. Who was the first, who was the mover?
It was Carol Penn.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Director Hamilton, and then seconded by Director Davidson. Any discussion? Any objections? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Next item.
Item 5 are reports from board directors.
Are there any reports from board directors pertaining to this particular board? I don't hear any. Thank you. Next item.
Next, we move down to public question period for items relevant to the agenda. As has been past practice, we made the submissions available via email or social media. We did not receive any items. However, as we have been doing for the last couple of meetings, we will take a 2-minute pause here to allow our web streaming to catch up, so that if there are any members of the viewing public that would like to contact us and ask any questions of the board, the phone number is 604-702-5480. And so we will just pause for 2 minutes and we'll see if we have any calls on the business thus far. Okay, Madam Chair, I have been notified that there is actually a member of the public who is in the waiting room and would like to ask a question. We'll see if hopefully it is a question relevant to this agenda. So we will have staff bring that member of the public into this meeting and bring forward their question. The corporate officer will introduce the member.
Good evening, board. So as Jennifer has mentioned, we have opened up our board Zoom meeting to electronic participation by the public. I've been advised that we do have one member of the public who is watching tonight, and they have joined us on the Zoom meeting. For our directors, please note that as we bring this person into the meeting, you won't be able to see them, but they will be able to hear and see you. So we're going to bring Kelly into the meeting, and I'll ask Kelly to unmute herself, and she can ask her question and introduce herself with her name and her address. I see Kelly on the line there. Would you like to ask a question, Kelly? So perhaps what we can do is we can provide another opportunity as part of the board meeting should Kelly wish to answer, to ask a question.
Sure, that would be great.
All right, seeing no other questions from the public, we will now move to item 8, which is looking for a resolution to close the meeting.
Could I have a mover, please?
Bob moves.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Plum.
Thank you. Any objections? All in favor? Carried, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so now we will recess and move right into the Board of Directors meeting for the FERD.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the open portion of the Fraser Valley Regional District Board meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. The first item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 2, we have conduct of online meetings. There's a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Blue, seconded by Director Popov. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. Next item.
Next item is approval of the agenda and late items.
Passio.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Facio, seconded by Director Clute. Discussion?
Bales,
Bales,
can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Director Bales, and you have discussion on the agenda?
I wanted to make a correction to 11.4 on the agenda.
Okay, Director Bales, I understand from your email that you have issue with the referral motion, and I also understand that when staff reviewed that referral motion that it was consistent with the motion that was passed at East. Is that correct, staff?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. I might suggest that if you would like to discuss amending the motion for consideration, that Director Bales could do so when we consider item 11.4 and when we reach that point in the agenda.
Okay with that, Director Bales?
Well, a point of order would be that I read out the full motion, and I said beforehand I was reading out the motion, so it just didn't go on the agenda as the full motion. I don't mind waiting till 11.4, but I would like to have the full motion up there. So, okay.
Again, from what I understand, Director Bales, that the motion was referral, and your comments were you provided a preamble to your referral motion. If you're okay with discussing it on the agenda, I suggest we move forward and get to that agenda item. You're okay with that?
I'm okay with that, but it was one full motion, just to clarify.
Thank you, Director Bales. Any other comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any, the item carries. Next item.
Next item is 4.1. We have a presentation from Bruce Blackwell on the Community Wildfire Prevention Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell, and welcome to the virtual FERD. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to all the directors. I'll just move the PowerPoint up and share with you my screen. And that will be that. And so good evening, everyone. I had or my company had the fortunate opportunity to do a regional district community wildfire protection plan that we've been working on for the last year approximately. So we were retained to develop this community wildfire protection plan for 3 zones, A, B, and C, within the Fraser Valley Regional District. And for those of you who are not aware, this program was created to aid communities in developing plans to assess and improving safety and to reduce the risk of wildfire damage to property. So obviously, fire seasons over the last 15 years have demonstrated that there's considerable risk across the province, including the Fraser Valley Regional District. But there are a number of actions that can be taken, and this plan outlays a total of 144 recommendations across all 3 electoral or zones. They're focused on fuel reduction treatments, updates to existing plans, policies, bylaws. There is a focus on fire smart initiatives. This plan was funded by the Community Resiliency Investment, or CRI program, from the province. And going forward, the regional district can leverage support to implement a large number of the recommendations in this plan. I should say that there were a variety of staff and departments within the FVRD that have contributed and can contribute to dealing with risk moving forward in the community. I should also say that a number of the municipalities within the regional district are also acting on their own community wildfire protection plans. So just to get everybody's focus on what we looked at Zone A, which are electoral areas A and B. We looked at Zone B, electoral A, C, F, and G, Zone B, and what we call Zone C, which were areas D, E, and H. All of this material is presented in several volumes of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So if you haven't looked at it, these maps are duplicated there, and I know the detail is a little bit heavy here for this presentation. Part of the Community Wildfire Protection Planning exercise is to go out into the forested portions around communities and identify their fire threat and potential fire behavior. A significant amount of both A, B, and C are in high, moderate to high, and even extreme fire threat. Fire threat is defined by the province, and really it's a measure of the risk to interface in proximity to the fuels in the forest. And I think probably Zone B and Zone C offer some of the most significant risk given the forest proximity to the development that occurs within those zones. We identified treatment areas. These are areas where we believe the fuel hazard is significant and that there should be some form of fuel treatment undertaken in those specific areas. These fuel treatments are funded under the CRI program or under the new WRR, that's the Wildfire Risk Reduction Program. So the province will either fund them directly through CRI to you as a regional district, or if they're on Crown land, they'll fund it through the Wildfire Risk Reduction Program. But before you can actually do the fuel treatment, you have to go through a phase of developing prescriptions. Those prescriptions go through consultation, approved by the province, and then you would receive your funding. So Zone A has a small amount of area. It's listed as a moderate priority. Zone B has a total of 836 hectares that were identified. 331 hectares are considered high priority. And Zone C has 704 hectares, of which 252 hectares are considered a high priority. So all of these are ranked and they're areas you can see in the table at the top of each of these maps. I'm not going to go through every single recommendation. I've selected recommendations in all 3 zones, and I'll highlight sort of where they fall under each of the categories. We look at policy and bylaws. We look at fuel management, which we've already talked to. Access and egress is a very significant issue. We've learned from the 2017 and the 2018 fire seasons that many communities have had difficulty getting people in and out of the community during an evacuation event. And I know in your regional district, the Hemlock Resort had some problems from winter access issues. So I think access and egress is a significant issue. Fire Smart, very important. There's no point in doing all these fuel treatments. There's no point in doing all of this work unless we can get private landowners to embrace Fire Smart and deal with the risk associated with their private property. So we've put a considerable effort into outlining how and what the regional district should do in terms of encouraging Fire Smart. There's a communication and education section. There's a wildfire preparedness section, which really speaks to what your local fire departments can do and your fire suppression resources. Under policy and bylaws, this applies to all zones. We've recommended to update existing legislation to be considered with fire management and prevention goals, and to revise the corresponding OCPs to include both a wildfire hazard objective that sets policy relating to development in the wildland-urban interface. And really that's to limit the growth of more hazardous interface. In other words, more interface that doesn't meet Fire Smart standards. Obviously a growth management policy that considers wildfire risk and other natural hazards during development. So that speaks to access, that speaks to fire department capacity, speaks to a whole number of things. And we've recommended that you review your bylaws and update them accordingly. As well in the bylaw section, complete updates to your regional park strategic plan to consider threat in park acquisition and trail maintenance. I can tell you that there are a number of local governments across the province that have assumed parkland from development or other ways, and they've actually inherited a hazard that they've ended up having to spend local government funds to deal with when they could have been treated as part of the acquisition process. Work with planning and development department to ensure that house numbering is posted on new development to facilitate emergency response. This is a problem that's not unique to your regional district nor any municipality. There are lots of homes with numbering that makes responding to a fire or communicating about a fire, particularly a wildland fire, because there are numerous houses that are involved, where emergency or address posting becomes very important. Fuel management, we've already talked about that, but obviously we're encouraging you to go ahead with detailed assessment, prescription development, and ultimately treatment of the areas that have been identified. We believe that they will reduce a considerable amount of risk within the regional district. Access and egress, again, all zones, complete and participate in some testing and updates to the regional district evacuation plan. Develop a total access plan that includes a map of an inventory of trails and road networks within the natural areas in the regional district to aid in fire suppression planning, as well as evacuation. So one of the things that we find in some of these big fire events is that we don't have gate keys, we don't have access to roads, we have to evacuate people off trails. Some of them are unmapped, unmarked. And so the more we can do in inventorying and preparing information for the fire department, search and rescue, and other groups, the safer the community is. Access, obviously, in Zone A, we've recommended collaboration in the completion and regular testing of an evacuation plan for the Sunshine Valley. Again, that's on a major highway that really goes east-west, and there's only a limited evacuation capacity there. And ultimately, they need early warning to evacuate out of that community. In Zone B, we have identified collaboration in the completion and regular testing of an evacuation plan for Hemlock Valley. One of the big things that's happened in some of these large wildfire events is we've lost critical infrastructure, whether that's electrical, whether that's water, all the things that are important in responding to a fire and in recovering from a fire. In Fort McMurray, that fire lost its lift and pumping station, which delayed the community going back into the citizens going back into the community and restarting the economy in that city. So we're recommending formal fire smart assessments of all the critical infrastructure that's been identified in the plans. Where you're building critical infrastructure in the future, we're recommending using fire resistant construction materials, thinking about the building design and landscaping, both completing and establishing new infrastructure. Fire smart, I talked about that earlier, but ideally, if we can train the fire department members or hire a qualified professional as a local fire smart representative to conduct fire smart home assessments and assist communities in complying with the fire smart principles. There are a number of communities and regional districts that are actively promoting fire smart. I can tell you that the regional district of Central Kootenay has 2 program representatives. Some of the other communities I'm working in, Whistler, Bowen Island, are doing regular updates to community members and have things like a community chipping service, all of this funded under CRI, that's assisting people in one, understanding the risk of the property and what are the appropriate measures, and then assisting them financially by providing some service. So again, you have the ability to apply for funding through UBCM's CRI program to develop a local fire smart rebate program for residential homeowners and completing fire smart activities. Communication and education. You've got 3 major documents with summaries of recommendations. Ideally, these should be publicly made available. Again, working to promote fire smart approaches to residents in the interface, and establish a local interface steering committee with government, First Nations, and key stakeholders to coordinate some of these wildfire risk reduction initiatives. You've already got a wildfire working group established as part of developing this plan, and that group could be broadened to support more activities across the region. Again, apply for some of those fire smart funds, promote external residential sprinklers. In some of your more remote areas, sprinklers would aid the fire department in limiting some of the potential engagement of homes to fire. Ideally, the other area that typically we've seen a lot of problems with, and I've worked on this actively over the last 3 years, is farmers with livestock or ranchers with livestock, even fruit producers, have been significantly impacted by wildfire. And through the Climate Action Initiative, the Department of Agriculture, or the Ministry of Agriculture, has produced some good information on farm fire smart assessments and mitigation to reduce the impact of farmers, including things like livestock evacuation, livestock protection, and even protection of crops for fruit growers. So within your regional district, you have a significant agriculture community, and it's important to encourage the use and application of some of that material. Wildfire response resources. Obviously, the fire departments should work with BC Wildfire Service to create and maintain annual structural and interface training programs, maintain a high level of fire department member education and training specific to interface, particularly in volunteer halls that have a lot of turnover, and all new rural development outside of the existing Fraser Valley Regional District water systems should work towards trying to meet this NFP, that's the National Fire Protection Association standard 1142. It is a difficult standard to meet, but particularly when they're not on a public water system, we need to have higher standards of water delivery to help the fire department in some of these wildfire events. Obviously, I've already spoke to it, complete a vulnerability assessment of critical infrastructure, secondary power sources, and fuel availability. So that's whether you've got enough diesel to power your generators through a long emergency event. Even some of the fire halls need to be thinking about fire smart. I've seen numerous volunteer fire departments around the province that don't even meet the fire smart standard, and they would be a hazard for department members to respond to a big fire from those facilities. Again, pursue funding opportunities to acquire a specific wildland equipment for fire departments, and we've identified both Hemlock Valley and North Fraser where funding should be targeted for those two halls. So in summary, I think that you're now on a pathway to start a significant risk reduction across the regional district. I've said there was a total of 143 general and specific recommendations that we've outlined in the 3 zones. And obviously, implementation of this requires collaboration with member communities, First Nations, and stakeholders to successfully address the risk. I want to just, in summary, speak to, I know 143 recommendations seems like a big task. I look at these plans as living documents that really, it takes 10 years to make a meaningful impact. I've been working with a number of communities for 15 years, like for instance, Resort Municipality of Whistler, I started in 2005, District of North Van, I started in 2007. Only now are they starting to get to a point where they've actually meaningfully impacted the recommendations from the first plans that were developed. So I don't see this as you're going to achieve this all in 1 year, all in 5 years, but longer term, it's just taking a long-term vision and attacking this in the priorities that we've identified. So that concludes my presentation. I welcome your questions and comments, and thank you for the opportunity to present this tonight.
Thank you for the presentation, and look for questions.
Bales.
Engar.
Okay, go ahead, Director Bales.
A few questions. One was what specifically at Hemlock needed improvements, as I'm the director for up there. Another thing that wasn't mentioned, have you considered the herbicide desiccation of underbrush in logging creates a fire hazard, and also mixed species of trees helps with fire prevention. And one more thing, have you considered making it easier for people to, firewood cutters to go in and clear?
Okay, so let's start with number 1. I think the biggest issue as it relates to Hemlock is evacuation and egress. Having the opportunity to get people in, not just in a one-way in, one-way out situation. If you have a large number of people gathering there, for instance, on a weekend, if there was a fire, is there an opportunity to get them out easily and effectively, or would there have to be a helicopter evacuation? This is not an uncommon problem, but it needs to be thought out more broadly, and the capacity needs to be in place to make that evacuation happen. Let's take the simple one with regard to firewood cutting. That's under the jurisdiction of FLNRO, Forest Lands, Natural Resources and Resource Operation, and they issue permits. I don't think you're going to get the kind of reduction of hazard that you might think you are. Similarly, when we're targeting some of this risk reduction, fuel management, it's very targeted around buildings, around people's homes. Typically, when you apply this at a larger landscape scale, it needs to be planned out and targeted to broader areas that we would focus on creating landscape level breaks. There are some, I think there's 2 or 3 areas that we've targeted for landscape level breaks. Again, practices related to harvesting are not within the purview of this plan. So both your deciduous comment, your firewood comment are not something that we can address within the context of this plan.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Go ahead, Director Engar.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really looking at this vast document to look through and absorb it all. A very thorough view and overview of everything. As the director of REE, I'm really looking for a short priority list, what we could focus on. What are the most essential things to start with? And I caught that there is a lot of things that can be done, but that simple 1, 2, 3 is what I'm looking for. I don't know if this is the time for you to relate that to my area specifically, but those are sort of practical things that we need to start working on. For instance, we've worked as a community to implement sprinklers on rooftops. We're encouraging people all the time to trim trees back and keep shrubbery away from the house as much as possible. But we're living right in a dense forest here. The practicality of those things is, as you say, is going to take some time. So I'm really looking for a short list. Any thoughts you could share on that?
Well, I mean, obviously where we've prioritized fuel management, I would suggest is the first thing, because doing that fuel treatment is going to take the fuel out of the fire, reduce the heat load, and protect the areas that have been identified. Right now, I mean, where there are significant fuel treatments identified, those areas have been identified because they are a significant risk of a fire leaving the community from a house fire and spreading into the forest, or a fire coming in and burning a number. So I'm given the time it takes to make meaningful impacts, you need to start on it right away. I also believe the evacuation, egress, emergency response can never get enough attention, because that's your first line of defense. And thirdly, as I said earlier, obviously, if individual property owners don't pay attention to their own hazards and don't address them, you fail, because those houses will still burn, or those people will still be at risk. So I think where the regional district can be successful in promoting that, I know that I'll give you an example. Bowen Island, for example, has done Fire Smart workshops for the last 3 years. You sign up for the workshop, and that allows you access to a local chipping service that they're providing through the fire department. So where you can create incentives for people to do things, and the CRY funding envelope allows for these kinds of cooperative approaches. So I know, you know, there's more to this than just saying you should do this. I think government, as much as possible, needs to create incentives, because otherwise people think the problem is too big, too daunting, and they're not going to spend their own resources. And even if you can get neighborhoods starting on this, they start to shame other people within their neighborhoods to do the work. So I'm a big believer in starting right at the individual home level and focusing outward as much as trying to do some of this landscape stuff. So I would say those are my 3 priorities.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell.
Dixon.
Go ahead, Director Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. Just looking for a little clarification. So I'm Area H, that's Cultus Lake, Columbia Valley.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about your access and the evacuation, access and egress, I think is their title, where you had listed, I believe, one place from Zone A and then Hemlock Valley.
Yeah.
Is my area not considered to have a concern in that area, or are those just ones you highlighted for the presentation?
I can't highlight every recommendation, every plan. I apologize for that. So you have to look to specific recommendations within your plan. I just used examples tonight, but every plan has unique recommendations on all of these, or every component of each zone has its own recommendations. So if you didn't get the recommendations you're looking for, then you're welcome to contact me. But I should say that, you know, we went through a broad phase of consultation with staff, other stakeholders to identify and vet these recommendations before we've come to you with recommendations tonight. But you know, with 143 recommendations, I can't go through every single one of them tonight.
Fair enough. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Davidson.
Go ahead, Director Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. Just questions through to staff, to Mr. Dick. Any idea for time frame as to when we would be able to see the complete plans? Thank you.
Through the chair to Director Davidson, at this point, no, this would have to be a discussion. I would not like to give you any concrete numbers at this time. I'd like to review this further.
Thank you.
And I don't see any other questions. So thank you, Mr. Blackwell, for your time and your presentation. And let's move to the next item, please.
Thank you.
Next item is 4.2. We have Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation and Forest Enhancement Society of BC. It's a presentation from Mr. Dan Buffett and Mr. Steve Kazuki.
Welcome, gentlemen. The floor is yours.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight about the two organizations who are working together to improve fish and wildlife and habitat in the regional district there. In terms of a presentation, is there one ready to roll, or should I share my screen?
Ms. Kinnaman?
I think you should have the ability to share your screen if that's easier. We find usually it's easier to advance your own slides in a Zoom environment, but we've got, I think we probably have it if it doesn't work.
Okay, hold on. Share screen. Okay.
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right. Good evening, everyone. As I mentioned, Steve and I are here tonight to present to you just a number of projects both of us are working together. Give you a little bit background. The Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation. We conserve projects for fish and wildlife in BC, as well as provide education about BC's fish and wildlife in British Columbia. And I am the Chief Executive Officer of the program. And I'll hand it over to Steve as well to give a little intro as well.
All right. Well, the Forest Enhancement Society of BC, or FES BC, as people call us, we are a relatively new agency of the government, and we use provincial government funding to try to do good work in the forests. And one of our 5 prime areas for our mandate is to assist with wildlife habitat improvement. And that's where we partnered up with the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, which is Dan's organization. And we saw them as real leaders in that field. They have a very strong technical expertise with their wildlife biologists on staff, as well as decades of a track record of being able to deliver these kinds of programs. So we were more than delighted to partner up with them and let them take the lead on delivering the projects, some of which Dan will speak to.
Perfect, great, thank you, Steve. So a little bit background about the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation. So we were founded in 1981, and essentially the anglers and hunters and trappers and guide got together and said, we're willing to pay a surcharge on our licenses to improve the conservation outcomes for BC's fish and wildlife. So through that fund, each year, the licensees pay for a number of projects throughout BC. And as Steve alluded to, we've got a fairly competitive and technical review process for all our proposals that we receive. We're open to receive proposals from anyone that has a good idea. So we receive proposals from government, First Nations, NGOs, land trusts, individuals, and academics. And since that time, 1981, we've funded more than $189 million in grants for nearly 3,000 projects throughout BC. To give you a rough idea, this year, $9.2 million was approved for funding this year. That's the most ever we've ever approved for funding for 180 projects. And as we break down, to give you an idea, in the Fraser Valley, that roughly equates to about 31 projects in the Fraser Valley, with a little over $750,000 worth of projects. To give you an idea of the type of projects, it can be fishing projects, so helping youth learn to fish, funding for steelhead, bull trout, working with First Nations on fish reels. That was nearly $250,000 for various fish projects, as well as the white sturgeon project, funding with the Fraser River Sturgeon Conservation in the province and the angler guides, another $150,000 this year towards that project. Up in Ryder Lake, working with the Fraser Valley Conservancy to improve amphibian habitat. And then on the education side, we do work with schools. And for example, we have 3 wild schools in the Fraser Valley. I think Silver Creek Elementary, St. James and St. Anne's in Abbotsford. And essentially this is taking students out into nature, getting them out with hands-on activities going on. We fund a number of facilitators that work with the schools, and we have a number of GO grants that we approve each year. And essentially a GO grant is a school requests funding to HCTF to usually pay for busing to get students out into the wild. And to give you a little idea, just spatially, the projects here, which showing the Lower Mainland and out in the valley, you know, a number of fishing and angling projects that I had mentioned earlier, which are in the blue, and a number of wildlife projects that I'll also mention a little bit later in the presentation. Steve, I will hand it over to you.
All right, well, fairly quickly here, this presentation is primarily to let you know what's happening in terms of enhancing wildlife habitat and wildlife. But we also wanted to give you just a small appreciation of what the Forest Enhancement does. In addition to wildlife, we have also funded significant amounts of wildfire risk reduction projects, right from community wildfire protection plans that you just reviewed with Bruce Blackwell. Hi, Bruce. Through to prescription development. And I heard some questions around real detailed prescription level stuff, right through to actually treatments on the ground and reducing those fuel loads in the interface and the Crown land portions. So very important, particularly for me personally. I'll just to share with you, I was one of the evacuees from Williams Lake. It was a difficult month, hard period in our time in our life, and but more importantly, it was a real hardship on a whole bunch of other folks who are less fortunate than I. So I'm really delighted to hear that you and many other community leaders are starting to really pay attention to that really important public safety issue. We also fund a lot of stand rehabilitation. It could be dead pine stands, wildfire killed stands, or just thinning out. We have projects, for example, in Haida Gwaii, where the Ton Haida Nation wanted to thin out some trees to accelerate the creation of old growth attributes for the benefit of goshawk and black bears and a whole bunch of other species. We also do fiber recovery, but a lot of our fiber recovery also counts as beneficial carbon treatments on the forest. And we do that in 3 ways. We can plant trees in areas that otherwise wouldn't be planted. And as those trees grow, they sequester carbon from the atmosphere, and trees are like you and me and almost all living things on Earth. We're primarily based on carbon. So those trees are accumulating carbon, and when we plant trees, they take more carbon out of the air. We can also fertilize trees, and the faster the trees grow, the faster they sequester carbon. And thirdly, we can use waste fiber after the logging is done. And if those piles of wood waste would otherwise be slash burned, but if instead we use it to create clean, green bioenergy, well, that's a real greenhouse gas benefit, not only locally, but internationally. And these kinds of things help BC and Canada meet our climate change targets. Next slide. So just a few examples of what we're doing that you might be interested in. There's a biodiversity and carbon storage project that we funded. We partnered with UBC to consider climate change adaptation, which is different than mitigation, which I spoke to earlier. So if climate change is happening, what can we do to anticipate it? So in agriculture, it might be changing your crops. In forestry, it might be shifting species to new areas where recognizing that it's going to be warmer and drier. An interesting project that represents a lot of what we do is with a company called Leadcore, and they're actually taking waste wood from logging in the interior in the Merritt and in Princeton area and bringing it down to Chilliwack, and they're making a valuable product out of it. And remember, this is biomass that otherwise would have been burned and emitted smoke in the air. And then one of our biggest projects is with the province's chief forester to reforest the vast areas that were killed after the wildfires in 2017 and 18. So thanks for your interest.
Thanks, Steve. And as Steve mentioned, both organizations, have had their mandate, but where we overlap really well is under the wildlife habitat area Steve had mentioned. And so since 2016, we've been working together on funding joint projects. Steve had mentioned using the HCTF, our grant application and technical review process. And so the FESBC, they've committed over $3 million for projects. So essentially what's been done is jointly using, our technical review process and using funding and bringing that science in the forest side from FESBC with our wildlife side. We've been able to fund a lot more projects, a lot of good quality projects, and being able to fund them completely and fully as well too. And to give you, just a quick little snapshot of 3 projects just here on the wildlife side, working with weasels throughout the watersheds in the forest habitat areas, looking at the habitat and how to link that forest practices better with a number of improvements for the wildlife in the area. On the wetland side, restoring and reconnecting some floodplain forests as part of the Heart of the Fraser initiative. And as well an overall BATS program with the BC Conservation Foundation, again, reaching out into the community and with citizen science for this project. So overall, we just wanted to, bring this to your attention that, both organizations are working with a number of the leaders in your area on both the fish and wildlife side to put money in their hands as we recognize they're the experts working in your communities together. So with that, I'll end the presentation there, and if there's time for questions, happy to answer.
We do have a couple of minutes for questions. So over to board members, directors. If you have any questions for either of these 2 gentlemen, let me know.
Engar.
Go ahead, Director Engar.
Thank you. Yes, I haven't got a visual back yet, but thank you for the very informative presentation to both of you. Steve, I'd like to definitely follow up with you. I think we probably have a lot to talk about and how you can help us implement the wildlife protection plan that we just now undertaken. So I look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Don't see any. Okay.
Bales?
Okay, go ahead, Director Bales.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say we probably have a few good projects in Area C that I'd also like to connect with you on. I know that the Desroches School, that's Area G actually, but Area C goes to it as well. They're doing wildlife enhancement for salmon and streamside at their school, but there's also other projects that I'd like to work on that sound like a good fit for you. So if you can... I didn't see a phone number there, but I did see the website, so I guess.
Okay.
Is that the best way to contact you?
Sure, and Director Bales, I will find your number and send you an email with my number as well too, so we can connect up on that side for sure.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, thanks, gentlemen, and appreciate your time and appreciate the work that you are doing in our region and around the province. Great work.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks. Next item.
Next is 5.1. We have the draft Fraser Valley Regional District Board meeting minutes of June 23rd, 2020.
Moved.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Pranger, seconded by Director Roth. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor. Opposed if any. The item carries. Next item.
Next item is item 6. We have committee and commission minutes for information and matters arising. We can separate any of those items, but this is information only.
Thank you, directors. Any questions on any of the information items?
Dixon.
Go ahead, Director Dixon.
Just, we're talking about the minutes, right? Yeah. I did send just an email today just for the minutes for the RACS meeting on July 14th. It has me listed as attending, and I was not there. So
great. We'll get that corrected.
Those are going to be corrected.
I wonder who that person was that attended and said they were Director Dixon then.
Maybe it was my husband.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none. Next item.
Next item is item 7.1, which are motions for which notice has been given. It's an amendment to the FVRD Board and Committee Procedures Bylaw brought forward by Director Davidson and Electoral Area F. There's a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. And mover and a seconder.
Davidson?
Okay, and we have a seconder on the item, seconded by Director Adamson. Discussion on the motion. Go ahead, Director Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. So this is basically in response to the point of order at last month's board. And it struck me as a little bit counterintuitive that one director should be limited as to how they can speak to a matter. From our Code of Responsible Conduct, there's a line item there that reads that recognize that vigorous discourse and debate on a matter is integral to the democratic process and will encourage healthy, respectful, and constructive debate, etc. So with that in mind, I thought it made sense to look at a rule change, and that's basically the rationale for the motion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director Davidson. Director Lowen, I see your hand was raised.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Let me suggest a hypothetical case. So a motion is, it's put on it's on the floor, and no one's in favor, and so it dies on the floor. However, with this amendment, someone may want to move it just for the sake of being able to speak against it. And to me, that's a waste of my time, and I think the board's time. And I think there's for practical reasons that the Robert's Rule of Order put that in the rules. So unless there's support for any motion, it'd be pointless. I think that's why is the rules in place. So hypothetically, like I said, I repeat, someone wishes to speak to something, and they could put a motion on the floor and it was seconded, and then they would speak against it. That makes absolutely no sense. So I'm not in favor.
Thank you, Director Lowen. Any other questions or discussion? I see Director Mercer. Go ahead.
Just a question through you to perhaps our CAO. Are not the rules of order dictated by the provincial government for this board?
Really good question. Yeah, really good question through the chair to Director Mercer. As I understand it, each local government establishes its own procedures bylaw. And when those procedures are silent, we defer to Robert's Rules of Order. But perhaps our corporate officer, who acts as the expert in all these matters procedure, would like to weigh in.
Ms. Riley.
Thank you. So through the chair to Director Mercer. So the Local Government Act requires that a local government pass its own procedure bylaw. And in our case, we have a procedure bylaw, and in there it mentions that where our bylaw is silent, Robert's Rules of Order takes over. So
thank you.
In this case, our bylaw doesn't speak to the matter of a mover speaking against our own motion. However, we could amend it to address that issue. It's up to the board and their appetite of whether they'd be willing to consider that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Alexis, go ahead.
Thank you. This actually happened last night in council meeting where we had somebody move a motion that was in favor, seconded it to get on the table, but then in the end didn't support it. And so this, just to get it on the table was essential for healthy discussion. And so I'm actually in favor of allowing, because you don't know in the end if you're going to support it or not. So I'm actually in favor if you are still wanting to speak against it, there are, reasons for that. So I'm actually would like to look at this a little bit further.
Thank you. Director Adamson, go ahead.
Yes, I would agree with the last speaker. Sometimes, you think you're against it, but you second it for discussion, and they might convince you different. So I think that unless we change this, there's times there might not be debate because people are thinking that they don't want something when really maybe they could want it. So I'm in favor of changing it.
Director Ross, go ahead.
Yes, just to add to those comments, the whole premise of, government really is that we are to keep an open mind until we actually take that vote. So I agree with this as well, because there have been many times where I've felt a certain way going into a discussion, and my colleagues have changed my mind as well. So in favor of this.
Thank you. And just looking to see if there are any comments
Bales?
for this time. Go ahead, Director Bales.
Oh, I would agree with the last 3 or so comments, and also just say sometimes you need to be able to speak to somebody else's comments, and if you think that they're wrong as far as things that you might know if you're the area director, for instance. And so if you can't speak to it, then you can't debate things that might have been said that were wrong. I know I had that once with a resolution at UBCM where I wasn't allowed to speak after the first time, and so I couldn't correct a wrong assumption, something that I knew for sure was wrong. So it really made a difference, I think, in the vote. And I think we need to be able to speak to anything that hasn't been spoken to previously, or to be able to debate something that you might think was wrong. Also, I noticed that there is a lot of hesitancy on moving a motion more than once because of this. I think if we don't change it, I think certain times there might be hesitancy for people to move and second a motion. So I think that we need to be always open to debate.
Thank you. For first time, I see you, Director Lowen, and I'll come back to you. And just want to make sure we get anybody who hasn't spoken once the opportunity. I don't see anyone. So Director Lowen, for a second time, go ahead.
So the rules don't preclude a seconder from speaking against a motion that they've seconded. That's in play. But really stop and think about it. It makes absolutely no sense to move a motion that you're against. Why in the world would you put it on the floor? You would hope that no one would be in favor of it and it would die. I can't think of any good reason why anyone would wish to move a motion that you're going to speak against.
Yes, strategically, Director Lowen, I understand the point you're making. I also thought it would be helpful to share that we did consult a registered parliamentarian, and the notes that I have in front of me are that although speaking against one's motion is a technical violation of Robert's Rules of Order, in fact, it should be considered an insignificant procedural violation. As long as allowing someone to speak against their own motion does not violate any other member's rights or does not violate or harm the progress of the meeting, it should be considered insignificant. And more harm is likely to be done to the tone of the meeting by raising a point of order on these minor violations. So I thought that might be interesting from a parliamentarian point of view. I'm fairly ambivalent. Although I would suggest if anyone is open to adding an amendment to Director Davidson's motion, that in this referral back to staff, that staff have the opportunity to identify any other housekeeping items that may be required in reviewing the procedural bylaw. I know we don't do it very often, and I don't want to keep coming back to it. So in this process, I'm wondering if someone would like to move an amendment to say, and further, that staff identify any other housekeeping items that may be required in amending the procedural bylaw.
I'll make that, Alexis.
Thank you. And is there a seconder to the amendment? Seconded by Director Ross. And any comments on the amendment? Director Lowen.
Okay, just technicality here again. I don't want to prolong this any longer than I need to. I'm not in support of the first half of that motion, but I am in support of the second half of that motion.
Thank you, Director Lowen. I guess a motion to separate, you could do it if we want to get really, really technical here. No, now we're just showing off. All right, any other commentary on the amendment? I don't see any. I'm going to call. Oh, go ahead, Director Bales.
Oh, I just sort of vaguely remember there has been a time when an amendment to the bylaw hasn't been filed. So yeah, I think we need to look at things that maybe haven't been filed as well. I can think of something that I need to do some research on, and I don't want to talk about it tonight, but that would be included in the amendment, so I'm in favor of the amendment.
Very well, Director Bales, and I think if you wish to bring that up directly with staff, that's probably a great opportunity to do so as they start to review that. I don't see any of the comments on the amendment. I'll call the question. The amendment, all in favor, opposed if any, and on the motion as amended, any final comments?
Davidson?
Go ahead, Director Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to put it out there too, that I think one other reason why it's a good idea to allow this is that things can happen between committee and board. And somebody who was in favor of something at committee could have new information, and it's important to have that information and present it to the board rather than let it die without discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Davidson. Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed if any? Motion as amended carries. Next item.
Next item is 8.1. We have the 2019 annual report. The board will recall that we previously presented the financial portion to the board for approval. This is what the GFOA might refer to as the popular report, the glossy marketing version that goes over our successes for 2019. And so this is just an information item and a reference document for each of your areas.
Thank you, Ms. Kinnaman. Any questions on the annual report?
Dixon?
Go ahead, Director Dixon.
Not a question, just a thank you. I went through it and actually used some of that information when I was needing to speak to people this week about what is a regional district. So well done and thank you for that.
Thank you, Director Dixon. And I don't see any other comments. So again, yep, fantastic work by all. And certainly in reviewing these documents, it gives a good idea of the breadth of work that's underway in our region. Very good work. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 8.2, we have appointment of Head of Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy and Privacy Officer. There's a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Facio, seconded by Director Dixon. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor, opposed if any, the item carries. Next item.
9.1, we have the 2020 grant and aid request for the Cultus Lake Aquatic Stewardship Strategy in Electoral Area H.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Dixon, seconded by Director Dickey. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor, opposed if any, the item carries. Next item.
Next is 10.1. We have zoning bylaw number 1594, which is a proposed rezoning of 52655 Yale Road in Electoral Area D to facilitate a future subdivision between 52655 Yale Road and 10159 Carricks Road, with the potential for 2 new lots to be created.
Thank you. And this is for EAs.
Dickey moves.
Moved by Director Dickey and seconded by Director Stobart. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor, opposed if any, the item carries. Next item.
10.2, we have zoning bylaw 1597, which is a proposed rezoning of 10789 North DeRoche Road in Electoral Area G to facilitate a single burial plot within an existing religious building.
Thank you. Mover and a seconder, please.
Stobart.
It's moved by Director Stobart, seconded by Director Davidson. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor and opposed if any, the item carries. Next item.
Next item is 11.1. We have development variance permit 2020-03 to vary the height regulation in the waterfront residential zone at 29 Lakeshore Drive in Cultus Lake, Electoral Area H. I will just draw the board's attention that there were 2 letters of opposition that were received and circulated today via email.
Thank you. And what's the board's wishes?
Move Dixon.
It's moved by Director Dixon and seconded by Director Engar. Discussion.
Dixon.
Go ahead, Director Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is probably through you to Mr. Daniluz. Just I want some confirmation. To my understanding, after having read the letter from the neighbor, but also looking at the recommendation and the variance, is that the actual overall height of the building is not going to be any higher than what is allowed if they had built a 2-story building. So just if I could have some confirmation from Mr. Daniluz, and maybe I'll ask the other one as well. And there is concern about this person's views being impeded, and just if Mr. Daniluz could speak a little bit about that, that might be helpful as well. Thank you.
Mr. Daniluz.
It's correct. Thank you, Chair Lum. It's correct to say that the proposed variance would not impact the overall height of the building. The zoning bylaw allows a height of 22 feet, and the proposed house would meet that height. Rather, the proposal has to do with the way that the interior space in the building envelope is divided into stories, and it would the proposal variance would allow an additional story within the rectangular cube that the zoning establishes between setbacks and building height for the proposed house. With respect to the second question about views, the proposed variance wouldn't negatively impact the views. It wouldn't change the maximum allowable height of the structure, nor would it change the setback to the rear lot line, which is coincident with the lake. So in the view of staff, the variance would not impact the views from adjacent lots.
Thank you, Mr. Daniluz. Any other questions? I don't see or hear any, so I'll call the question. The motion, all in favor? Opposed, if any? The item carries. Next item.
Next is 11.2. We have development variance permit 2020-07 to reduce the front and side lot line setbacks at 58261 Fancher Road in electoral area B.
Thank you. And
Move
it's moved by Director Adamson and seconded by Director Davidson. And discussion on the item. Don't hear any. Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed, if any? The item carries. Next item.
Next item is 11.3. We have development variance permit 2020-08 to reduce the interior side lot line setbacks at 43830 and 43836 Lock Road in electoral area C.
Thank you. And a mover and a seconder. Moved by Director
Bales
and seconded by Director Stobart. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? The item carries. Next item.
Next is 11.4. We have commercial gravel operation permit 2020-01 for Statlu Resources, 12 kilometers Chehalis Forest Service Road in area C. There's a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. And on the motion, it's moved by Director Bales, seconded by.
Oh, well, I want to put my whole motion into the record as well.
Director Bales, I'm going to get the motion on the floor and then I'll allow you to speak to it.
Clute will move it.
So would you like to move the motion and then amend to include sorry, I've got Director Bales. I just want to verify. Director Bales, would you like to move the motion as it's stated and then amend it to include what you feel should have been added to the motion?
I think maybe I'll pull back on my moving and just speak to it as not being recorded properly.
Okay. Thank you, Director Bales. So Director Clute is moved, seconded by Director Adamson. Discussion on the motion. I'll go to the mover first. Director Clute, if you'd like to speak to it.
Thank you, Chair. I think it makes good sense that it get referred back to staff with respect to some of the consultation that the lack of consultation. So I'm happy with the motion that's put before us.
Thank you, Director Clute. Any other discussion?
Bales.
Go ahead, Director Bales.
Okay, I wanted to read my full motion as I had forwarded to the EASC.
Sorry, Director Bales, I think that's going to be out of order. You can move to amend it. You can discuss the motion that's on the table. You're not going to read another motion into the record. So would you like to make an amendment to this motion?
Okay, I'll make an amendment to the motion that
Perfect.
is on the record.
Go ahead, Director.
Can I go ahead?
Yep.
Okay, I'll read the full motion that I have to amend.
Thank you.
Notice of motion to refer back to staff the motion 6.5 that is on the July 14th, 2020 EASC agenda, that the FERD board issue commercial gravel operations permit 2020-012 Statlu Resources Inc. for the gravel operation at 12 kilometers of the Chehalis Forest Service Road in Electoral Area C, until and after such a time that the permit applicant, Statlu Resources, complies with a communications plan that addresses how the permit holder will communicate with the surrounding community, as referred to on page 4 of the bylaw 1181 permit application. As indicated in the applicant's noise and water control, there are issues of residential concern, but the applicant has not communicated with the area communities on the current application. Also of concern is the terminology for mitigating impacts in the study, use of term should instead of shall. This gives the applicant the option to not follow the recommendations. And that's the full amendment to what's on as a motion.
Okay. Is there a seconder to Director Bales's motion? I don't see a seconder to the motion, so the amendment fails. Any discussion on the motion on the table? I don't see any.
Sorry, Jason. I
Go ahead.
was going to second that. I just technically challenged you. Pushed the wrong one.
Okay.
So I second Director Bales.
You second the amendment. Thank you, Director Adamson. Is there any discussion on the amendment?
Dixon.
Go ahead, Director Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually pulling it up on my screen. As far as I can understand, this lot or the operation is not actually in a community, but further up the first Forest Service Road. So I'm just looking for a comment about what the expectations around communicating with local communities are when operations are 12 kilometers up the Forest Service Road.
Bales?
Sorry, Director Bales, the question, I'm going to put it through to staff. Ms. Kinnaman or Ms. Danilou?
I think we could put this one through to Mr. Danilous as he is closest to this file.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Regional District's commercial gravel operations bylaw requires applicants for permits to include a communication plan in their application materials. The bylaw doesn't prescribe the methods of communication or times or communication expectations, but rather looks for the applicants to outline how they will communicate with neighbors in the course of the application, but perhaps more importantly, even in the operational phase of the mine. If the board feels like the communication plan submitted by the applicant doesn't cover the basis, the board's certainly entitled under the bylaw to ask for further information. And in this case, that might be a reasonable ask. The communication plan submitted by the applicant's pretty slender. It provides very few details, for example, for how the mine operator might advise the Morris Valley community when they've got a large job and the intensity of the work increases, or during periods where there may be blasting at the site, for example. So in the view of staff, while there's no immediate community surrounding the mine site, there is still a need for some communication with area residents about volume of traffic on haul routes and those kinds of things that could affect community values. In my opinion, it's not an onerous requirement on the proponent to buff up their communication plan and submit a little bit more information for your consideration.
If I may add to that, Mr. Chair, when this was first brought forward to the Electoral Area Services Committee, and we have had several staff review the video of that meeting, the preamble comments that were presented by Director Bales were not presented in the form of a motion. And I would still suggest that even what has been presented here tonight is not what you would typically see in a motion for a board's consideration. And so if this amendment fails, I do have a suggestion of how we could possibly meet the needs of everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Kinnaman. Further discussion, Director Mercer, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given the length of the amendment and given that the actual motion is to refer it back to staff, would it not be good business to actually refer it back to staff and have Director Bales just provide the text of her motion to staff to be considered along with the referral back to them?
I think there are some very, not speaking for Director Bales, but she has some very prescriptive language included in her amendment that she would like the board to consider in her amendment. I'm not sure whether we actually have the legislative authority to require that prescriptive language under our permitting process. That would be a question through to staff.
I guess if I may, before staff comments, it's obviously being referred back to staff because there's some more questions to be answered. And if Director Bales has additional questions and requirements, that information could be provided to staff to be considered in consideration of the referral back to them. But that's fine, thank you.
I believe that encompassed in the motion before, not the amendment, but the motion before, would be the opportunity to consider some of the concerns that Director Bales has raised.
Absolutely.
But I'm willing to listen to more discussion or questions on the amendment. Go ahead, Director Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I understand it, the role of the board in this motion or in this issue is rather restricted, as it's more of a permitting process rather than something that the board would normally weigh in on. I was curious what Director Danilus or our manager planning, Mr. Danilus, might say on the expanded or the amended motion.
Director Danilus or Mr. Danilus.
Thank you, Chair. The staff would be happy to work with the proponent to provide some guidance on what a strong communication plan look like, and work with the applicant on the resubmission of the communication plan and bring it forward again for a committee's consideration. I think that would be acting entirely within the requirements of the bylaw, which gives the board the clear authority to look to see that the bylaw the application meets the bylaw requirements, and even to impose site-specific conditions that support compliance with the bylaw. But once the board determines that the bylaw requirements are met, and then the board is obligated to issue the permit. It's not a discretionary approval like a rezoning. It's more akin to a building permit, where once an applicant meets the requirements, they're entitled to the permit. And I believe those are the limitations that Director Dickey was referring to.
Thank you, Mr. Danluz. Any other comments on the amendment?
Bales.
I'm just going to check and see if anybody hasn't spoken once. Director Bales, before I come back to you. I don't hear or see anyone wishing to speak on the amendment. So Director Bales, back to you for a second time. Go ahead.
Oh, just that in paragraph 2 of my amended on this motion, it uses language directly from the bylaw permit that the Statlew Resources would need to comply with the communications plan. And I wanted to make sure that that was addressed with the motion. And also right in their own applicant's noise water control plan, they talked about residential concerns. So unless we have a communication going with the applicant, we won't be able to address the concerns. There was also several letters written in. Some of them were pretty explicit about the concerns of dust from the road, different issues, and some of them don't really work with this permit particularly, but there are issues directly from the permit up the road. And I also took a drive up there, and I noticed there'd be quite a conflict of tourism use with the
On the
gravel
amendment,
use.
please, Director Bales.
Anyway, so that's I just wanted to address why I had that in with the amendment because it wasn't addressed with the original.
Thank you. And Director Dickey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be ready to vote in favor of the motion that was stated in our agenda. I don't think that the amended motion is something that I'd be willing to support. I'm afraid that we're entering into areas that are not the purview of the board, and rather this is more of a staff and the applicant item. And that would be my position. I'll support the motion on the agenda, but not the amended motion.
Davidson?
Director Davidson, go ahead on the amendment.
I agree with Director Dickey's comments. I think global replace should with shall. I have no idea if that's even, if that aligns with the bylaw. And I think Director Dickey's comments make perfect sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Davidson. Any other comments on the amendment? Don't hear any. So definitely in terms of my 2 cents on it, I would caution the mover on the amendment that I think we're getting far too granular into the communications plan. And I think rather than dictating to the applicant specific language, we just ensure that as our staff are working with the applicant, that they meet the letter of the law and our bylaw, and provide a fulsome communications plan that addresses concerns back to the board. And I would agree with the last 2 speakers that the original motion on the table does not preclude that from happening, and I believe it will also address some of the concerns raised by Director Bales without having to get into the level of detail as she's specified in the amendment. So I will be voting against it as well. Any further question on the amendment? All in favor? Opposed?
Davidson?
The amendment fails, and back to the original motion. I'll call the question on the original motion. All in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is 12.1. We have assignment and assumption agreements for sale of Shaw Telecommunications Tower on Sumas Mountain.
Fascio.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Fascio, Seconded by Director Stobart. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any, the item carried. Next item.
We could just get members of the board to mute their microphones while we're chatting. I'm just getting a little bit of feedback and having some difficulty hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is 12.2. We have NAV Canada license and occupation renewal at the regional park, air park.
Adamson.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Adamson, seconded by Director Robb. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any, the item carries. Next item.
Next is 13.1. We have the 2019 FVRD Outdoor Recreation Economic Impact Analysis. We have a quick introduction by Mr. David Urban to this report. There's a motion for consideration. And as I understand it, we also have our consultant available, Peter LaRose, on the line if any of you have any questions at all about this very thorough report.
Fantastic. Let's get the motion on the floor. Mover and a seconder, please. It's moved by Director Blue, seconded by Director Alexis. And Mr. Urban, over to you.
Thank you, Chair Lum. Just real quickly, I want to touch on the importance of this work that's been done. The board identified a gap in information related to outdoor recreation, and this report has certainly filled it and then gone beyond. It's a really important study that looks at, takes a very comprehensive look at the value of outdoor recreation in our region. It was a very labor intensive. We went an entire year last year with over 2,400 face-to-face interviews and data provided by a number of different organizations. All this information was gathered, collected, analyzed, and the results were broken down into 6 categories. The first is related to outdoor recreation use levels. You'll see that there's 7.4 million recreation days in our entire region. From there, we're able to look at the economic impacts, and there's 1.1 billion outdoor recreation related products and sales related to this sector. Huge numbers. From there, we could look at the characteristics of the outdoor recreation participants, as well as the visitor trips. And then we dove into Indigenous culture experiences because they're very compatible uses, and saw some remarkable information there. And then finally, the satisfaction levels of the participants. They were through the roof. We had really, really strong numbers and satisfaction for overall experience, which bodes well because we know we have the product, but now we've got the numbers backing it. All this, very sound data. It's going to inform current and future planning as well. It's going to set us up for better decision making on how to spend limited funds in this sector. So as said earlier, Peter LaRose has joined with us tonight, and both of us would be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Urban, and welcome, Mr. LaRose. Any questions from staff on the report?
Davidson?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Director Davidson.
So yeah, thank you through the chair to, I'm sorry I didn't get the consultant's name, and to he and staff. The report's got all sorts of great information in it, but I have some challenges with some of the spend numbers on it. And they're pretty counterintuitive. And if you look at the spend numbers in Appendix B, they've got, for example, snowmobiling. Snowmobiling would be $59 for a recreation day. Dog walking would be $113 per recreation day. Mountain biking, $855 per recreation day. It doesn't really make sense at that kind of cursory glance. And I couldn't find anything in the report that takes a deeper dive into how you're deriving these numbers. I've already had a couple of residents come to me saying, was this report done by special interest groups because the numbers aren't making a lot of sense? I'm just hoping for some comment from staff or the consultant. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Urban, or perhaps this one is for the consultant.
Through the chair to Director Davidson, I'd like Peter to speak to the numbers behind it. I think he would have that insight to shed light on your question.
Perfect.
Yes, absolutely. Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could actually get the direction to the specific figures that Mr. Davidson has an issue with and the specific page number in the report. Those figures that he cited do not sound intuitive. I would agree with that. All of the figures were gathered from a pretty comprehensive stratified random sampling program where we went and conducted face-to-face interviews, intercepts with recreationists in the field. We had over 2,400 of them. So I'd be surprised that we would have any results that would be significantly different than what we would see in the overall population. But if I could just get some clarification on the actual page number, and I can have a look at the data themselves and tell you whether or not I think we might have something we need to look back into.
Davidson?
Go ahead, Director Davidson.
Without giving you a page number, the one that kind of sticks out like a bit of a sore thumb. Well, here we go. Hang on. It is page. Oh, come on.
Perhaps comment on the methodology, Mr. LaRose, where you obtain the figures from the different recreational activities. So, I mean, if you're looking at a spend on a mountain biker and a dog walker and a snowmobiler, are you incorporating the cost of perhaps a maintenance on the mountain bike that might be spent locally versus perhaps I don't know, like the dog walker would have to spend certain ancillary costs that they would spend locally. I'm waiting. I'm trying to fill time while Director Davidson.
Oh, well, Chair, I can jump in anytime if you like.
Go for it.
So it's page 42 in the PDF. I can't tell you what page number it is in the report. It's the mountain biking section in Appendix B towards the end. It has a resident spending $855 per person per day on mountain biking. And that doesn't ring true. Basically, all the numbers I quoted are from Appendix B, and it does have things like a snowmobiler spending $59 per day, whereas a walker or dog walker would spend $113 per day. And these numbers just don't, to me, they're counterintuitive is the best way I could put it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. No, I'm just looking at the report right now, the final published version, and some of these figures actually don't align with what I've got in my economic impact tables that were produced as well. So this might actually be a formatting issue from the original document to the final desktop published version. I'll absolutely look into that because you're right, that absolutely doesn't make any sense. At mountain biking, a resident average would be $855 per person per day. As an annual expenditure, that might make sense. And I think that that's probably, that number somehow got conflated in there. We can see 5,480 per person per year, which is high, but not unusual for an activity like mountain biking. I would just point out there's a difference between the visitor spending and resident spending as well. In terms of the questions that were asked, when we spoke with residents, we asked them how much money they spent in the region for the entire year on all of their equipment related purchases and other ancillary expenditures for the entire year, because local residents will be recreating within the year and could recall the level of expenditures that they had in the region for the year as well, whereas visitors would typically not purchase equipment in the region. So there are some variances between the visitors and the residents, but I will absolutely state unequivocally that I think that some of those figures look off that you had mentioned, particularly the mountain biking resident average. And again, that is not what I have in my original tables. That's much higher. So I think we just may need to make some minor amendments to the report.
Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
So thank you. But even going beyond that, when you see something that says, for example, that somebody spends $59 a day snowmobiling, but $113 a day going for a walk, For me, it raises questions about the methodology, and it's not spoken to in detail in the report. And if I'm raising questions after having seen the report for 3 or 4 days, if this is going to be a document that we're referring to for years into the future, I would have challenge supporting it. I'm mindful to refer this back to staff. I think it needs to go there anywhere, but I should leave before making such a motion and give other people a chance to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. And not precluding comments from our consultant, just wondering if you had commentary on some of the methodology by which you gather some of those figures or arrive at some of the figures, the average daily spend of certain recreational activities.
Yes, absolutely. I can respond to that. So when we conducted the on-site intercepts, we went out to 121 different sampling locations where we would actually interview recreationists. We had in total 24 samplers who were deployed throughout the duration of the year that we were undertaking the sampling. We had standardized questionnaire, one for residents and one for visitors. The questionnaires were based off of similar questionnaires conducted for a variety of other outdoor recreation economic impact analyses conducted by Destination BC, as well as by different organizations and consultants that had conducted economic impact studies for mountain biking, for snowmobiling, and for a variety of other activities. So what we did was we, first of all, we estimated the volume of users by counting the number of vehicles that were parked at various parking lots and staging areas. We had in total, I believe it changed over time, but we had approximately 121, I believe, sampling locations, but we had about 160 locations where we counted vehicles. That could be for any and all types of outdoor recreation activities. The inventory was created with a combination of expertise that we got from the search and rescue clubs from the region. There were 3, I believe, that we worked with various outdoor clubs as well, the Chilliwack Outdoor Club, some of the Fraser Valley Mountain Biking Association. So we developed a really comprehensive inventory of all of the more commonly known recreation areas, and even those that had quite low volume of use as well. So the car counting program, we did a stratified random car counting program where we counted vehicles at those approximately 160 different locations throughout the year. But it's extremely robust in terms of the size of the sample that we had overall and for each of the individual activity sets. So we're very pleased with the confidence level that we got there. We then asked people, the visitors, we would ask them a variety of questions related to their expenditures in different categories. And then we asked similar questions around expenditure categories for residents, with the difference that for the visitors, we asked them about their accommodation expenditures, which local residents wouldn't have accommodations typically. And then we also asked local residents about their their expected annual expenditure for the prior year on equipment purchases. So that was the overall methodology, very consistent with what's been done in a variety of other studies, half a dozen completed by myself, a dozen completed by the technical analyst lead, Krista Morton, who led the study. Again, the figures, I do not recall seeing these figures in the appendix do seem off, but these were outputs that were produced after the final analysis was completed. So if there are some issues with these, I think that we should have a look at these figures, because I do agree that they don't seem intuitively to be accurate for a couple of the activities, such as snowmobiling at $59 per person per day. That's probably just going to barely cover fuel for most of the people that are going out in large vehicles, almost all up to the Coquihalla Summit snowmobile area. So I'd be glad to work with David to review this again and verify whether we need to update any of these figures in the appendix. But I can stand behind absolutely the methodology that was used. and the statistical reliability that we've got in the results.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Bales.
Go ahead, Director Bales.
Yeah, it's been a while since I had a dog, but I don't recall ever having to pay to walk it. Unless you're incorporating things like parking costs or gas. How does the cost for walking dog, how does that work out?
Yeah, so what we asked all recreationists the amount that they had spent in the past year for items such as fuel, other transportation costs, any equipment that was purchased. That could include walking shoes or something if it was purchased directly for the activity. Our samplers were advised to further, if people asked questions about the expenditure categories, to explain in some more detail. So for example, if we asked how much money people spent on dog walking equipment, the samplers were instructed that it should be equipment that was purchased specifically for that activity. So it could be harnesses, leashes, then it would be any food that you purchased if you were going out walking the dog that day. So that would be for residents. And then if you had visitors dog walking, I don't think there are very many. I think almost all of them were local residents. So the expenditures would have been principally on basically fuel and food and beverage.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Director Blue, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated the report and having the economic impact study done. I think that many of us are familiar with various parts of the region, but to see this economic impact and to see how we might work with our tourism, and also just to have each of our local municipalities or regional areas have access to this information and be able to really use it to showcase the area overall and to really look at some of the key areas to make some data-informed decisions about our investments, I think is so valuable. Thank you for your work on this.
Thank you, Director Blue. Director Siemens.
Thank you. And I just wanted to, we can hammer out our staff and the consultant can hammer out those numbers and any little indiscretions. But I think overall, I'd like to see this on our strategic planning session, and some of these things can help us maybe decide our plan a step forward with recreation. But I think it's very good. We have to start with some of this base analysis and just get a comprehensive overview of what's going on in the region in order to come up with a proper strategic plan. But I think this is something that our region can really benefit from. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Siemens. Director Facio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After the RACS meeting, we had this report as well. I made a report at our council meeting regarding this extensive report of what a great document this is moving forward in our tourism industry. It's the detail was obviously on the, like Director Siemens says, the figures and that can be sorted out later if there's any incorrections. But the overall plan, I think, is first class. And I want to thank all those concerned with David and the other people who were involved in this. Congratulations.
Thank you, Director Facio. Thank you, Director Facio. Director Stobart, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. Just one of the surprising things to me was the amount of acknowledgement and interest in Indigenous culture that was displayed by a large proportion of the people out there. And I think that is also going to give us a little bit of just some of the directions that we should be going in some of our forward planning here. So again, I just want to say thanks to all those that were involved.
Thank you, Director Stewart. And any other discussion? Director Alexis, go ahead.
Thank you. We did discuss this at RACS, and shortly after we had our economic recovery sort of roundup with Minister Robinson, and I referenced this document and the importance of it. So I'm really hoping that we can, once we clear up some of the numbers that are indicated with respect to spending, that we actually shout this from the rooftops, because I think this document will go a long ways in the Valley's recovery, economic recovery, just as long as, however, access points, as Director Ross brought up in RACS, that we are seeing significant increase to the numbers recreating in our areas. And so we are going to need some help, I think, provincially with access to these areas. So this is extremely significant document, and I agree it should be part of our strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Davidson?
Okay, let me just check if people have, for first time, Director Davidson, we'll go back to you. I don't hear any. Director Davidson, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with the comments of the previous speakers about lots of good stuff, despite my nitpicking. And with that, I'd like to make a motion to refer this back to staff.
Okay, so motion to refer back to staff to have a look at the appendix numbers prior to sharing it. And is that correct, Director Davidson? That's what you'd like staff to review with the consultant?
I would say to refer the consistency of numbers throughout the report.
Okay.
Second, Adamson.
Thank you. It's been seconded. Discussion on the amendment. Seeing none, all in favor of referral. Opposed, if any, item carries. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Urban and Mr. LaRose. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is 13.2. We have the Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program 2019 report results.
Thank you. And some information item. Sorry, just switching back into my...
There is a motion for your consideration.
There is motions moved by Director Lowen and seconded by Director Mercer. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor. Opposed, if any, the item carries. Next item.
Next, we have 13.3, which is the Fraser Valley Clean Economy Spotlight at Globe 2020. It's a summary report, and there is a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. A mover and a seconder. Moved by Director Ross, seconded by Director Alexis. Discussion. Director Ross.
Just a quick thank you to staff and the consultants and everyone involved in this report. I'm just extremely excited to share this far and wide. So thank you.
Director Ross. Just a quick reminder to get everybody to mute their phones and playback devices. Getting a little bit of traffic noise there. Okay, and any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor. Opposed, if any, item carries. Next item.
Next is 13.4. We have Agricultural Land Commission application, non-farm use on Bridal Falls Road in Electoral Area D.
Thank you. And moves. EAs, it's moved by Director Dickey, seconded by Director Stewart. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor. Opposed, if any, the item carries. Next item.
Next is 13.5. We have the FVRD Electoral Area Biosolids Management Plan.
Thank you. Mover and a seconder.
Dixon.
It's moved by Director Dixon, seconded by Director Davidson. Discussion.
Director Siemens.
Go ahead, Director Siemens.
Just in reading this report, I noticed that there was reference to the James Treatment Plant, which is jointly Abbotsford Mission. We are having we're in the middle of a review right now with the heavy industrial sludge. So I'm just not entirely sure that the capacity is there at the James Treatment Plant, and I'm just wondering if staff has had a chance to talk to our staff, maybe at the more senior level. I'm just wondering if they had any comments on that.
Thank you, Ms. Kinnaman.
Thank you. Through you to Director Siemens. I'm just looking for Mr. Islam, our Director of Engineering and Community Development. Is Tarek on the line? Wondering if we've lost him.
Is this one that can be referred back?
For sure.
At least have the question. I feel like I know the answer, Director Siemens, that in a management plan, to this extent that staff would be in communication with the different member municipalities. I know from the city of Chilliwack, whenever there are changes contemplated to the regional solid waste management plan, there's good discussion in the solid waste working group, and people are discussing the changes. However, not as familiar with the biosolids plan, but I know that we can refer this back if you wish.
Yeah, if I could make a motion to refer this back, if I can get a seconder, then I'll just explain maybe a little bit more.
Second by Director Alexis, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess because I'm on the joint shared services with the District of Mission, and so I just brought this up yesterday, late in the day, with our engineering department, and they historically this wouldn't necessarily be an issue. We do take industrial sludge that's trucked in. However, Metro Vancouver is in the process of closing theirs down on Anasis Island, possibly as early as this fall, we just found out. And one of the challenges and one of the reasons we're having a review is we have a number of food processing plants in the city of Abbotsford that are causing some challenges with the industrial waste and incredible upgrades to the to our system if we're not careful. And so we've got a review underway, and we're working closely with our industrial sectors in the food processing to see if there's less expensive ways for them to deal with it on site. So I just want to ensure that our staff are fully aware, because I don't want to see the regional district sort of caught off guard if we're not able to accept that waste. So just again, not trying to get too involved in the weeds here, but just want to make sure that there is a full comprehensive understanding. Because if the regional district staff talked to just somebody at the treatment plant, it is something that historically we have taken, but we have a bit bigger issue at play here, and I just want to ensure that everybody is in the loop.
Thank you, Director Siemens. So on the referral, I'll call the question. All in favor? Those if any, item carries. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is 13.6. We have the Rogers Communications Tower proposal for 52018 Yale Road in Electoral Area D.
Thank you. It's mover and a seconder. It's moved by Director Clute, seconded by Director Hamilton. Discussion.
Clute.
Go ahead, Director Clute.
Thank you, Chair. I guess this is through to staff. So anybody in the Popcom area knows the challenges with cell phone reception. So I think this is a fantastic location. There had been proposals within farmland in the Chilliwack area, but this makes way more sense with some of the other infrastructure in that area. My question is on point 3. It would have to go to the ALC for approval. Would that not be then a non-farm use approval that they would be looking for?
Ms. Kinnaman or Mr. Daniluz? Yeah.
Mr. Daniluz, I think, can answer that one.
And should the board pass the resolution in front of it tonight, the application will be forwarded to the ALC for a decision.
Okay, so if it goes to the ALC, and I saw this in one of the EAs, the Bridal Falls one, just a couple items in the agenda earlier, can we not add with support? Because right now we're leaving it fairly generic. And I know from the city perspective, when we deal with ALC things, and maybe Director Pranger can comment as being a past commissioner on the ALC, they do really take into account the local government's input, whether they provide support or without comment. So I'm just looking for, would this strengthen the case a little bit if we provided this with the FERD support, if that was the direction of the board?
Yes, that would be beneficial.
So maybe I'll amend it and add to point 3 that the proposed communications tower be in the agricultural land reserve, and that the FERD supports I'm trying to figure out the wording on it, but that the FERD sends it to the ALC for approval with their support.
With support.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a seconder to the amendment?
Second.
Seconded by Director Pranger. Discussion on the amendment with support. Director Dickey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to offer my support for the amended motion that be forward to the ALC with support. Thank you.
Thank you. A discussion on the amendment.
Davidson?
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, has there been much public communication on the tower yet? That, I mean, do we have the public support to support it? That is where I'm coming from. So questions for either Mr. Danilus or Director Dickey.
Mr. Danilus.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Director Davidson, the proponent sent a mail out to residents within 150 meters or so of the property. It's about 91 properties. No submissions were received by us from the public.
Thank you. Director Dickey.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to give a bit of a history of this issue in our community. Over a number of years, a lot of concerns have been voiced about inadequate cellular reception, and I've not heard any discussion that people were not supportive of towers coming into the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Clute.
Go ahead, Director Clute.
Thanks. Yeah, I would tend to agree. Everybody wants to use their cell phones, and anybody in that area seems to be dropping calls all the time. The location, for any of us who are familiar with it, up against the freeway, up against a hydro substation. I couldn't think of a better location for this, out of the way, out of sight, basically. So I fully support this.
Thank you. Any other comments on the amendment? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Motion carries. Back to the main motion. You can call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? The item carries. Next item.
Next item is 13.7. We have the Nakaman Island Shoreline Protection Project tender results. There's a motion for your consideration.
Stobart.
It's moved by Director Stobart, seconded by Director
Davidson.
Director Davidson, go ahead. And any discussion? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Director.
Just any work that we can get done to shore up agricultural properties and bank stabilization is a win-win.
Absolutely. Thank you, Director Pranger.
Stobart.
Director Stowart, go ahead.
Yeah, and again, the timing is good because once the water drops this year, we're going to be starting with the placement of that rock and doing that work very early in the new year. So glad to see it underway.
Thank you, Director Stobart. Any other comments or discussion on the motion? Don't see any. Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Item carries. Next item.
Next item is 13.8. We have recognition of School District 78 Trustee John Koyman. There's a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. Moved by Director Adamson, seconded by Director Hamilton. Discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Item carries. Next item.
Moving down to item 15, we have reports from committee meetings. There are information items if anyone wanted to separate any of those.
Thank you. Any questions on 15.1 or 15.2? Don't see any. Next item.
Next is item 17, reports by board directors.
Thank you, directors. That would be your opportunity.
Dixon.
Go ahead, Director Dixon.
Thank you, I just want to, it's been a busy week in the Area H, especially Cultus Lake, as far as parking.
Oh, we lost you there, Director Dixon.
Oh, that's probably my internet. Am I back?
You're back. I hear you now. Yep.
I just really wanted to thank the residents of Area H for all their just voices this week, just expressing concern around the parking and safety issues along the Columbia Valley Highway. But also, I really want to thank the stakeholders that have been working together to try to resolve the problem. So that's been a team effort with RCMP, Sawali, Modi, Cultus Lake Park Board, probably missing several, FVRD for sure. And so I'm looking forward to moving forward with just a long-term plan to help the Cultus Lake congestion. So,
thank you, Director Dixon. And thank you for your work and your patience on this file. Next, any other comments?
Adamson.
Okay, I heard Director Adamson report.
Yes, I just want to thank the new CAO and finance leader for helping Area B out in the last few weeks. Not going to get into the details, but it was great to have support from those two. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Director Adamson. And Director Engar, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, to somewhat echo Director Dixon's comments, we're kind of up against it here in the Chilliwack River Valley on the weekends these days. And really looking forward to moving ahead with Director Mercer's initial contact with the province and seeing if we can't squeeze a few dollars out of the jeans. To put it bluntly, we need more boots on the ground, and we're really starting to feel it out here. A lot of the parks are not open yet, and that's really creating a lot of extra traffic in our area, and I'm sure others in the FERD that are open. And yet we don't have the management plan in place. So it's really something I continually want to work towards, and I thank Director Mercer's previous work dealing with the province, and I'm hoping we can push a little harder and keep on going with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Engar. Any other reports from directors?
Bales.
Go ahead, Director Bales.
Just following Director Engar's comments, when I went up the Chehalis Forest Road Sunday before last, I passed by, within an hour and a quarter, I passed by going up to 13 kilometer. I passed by 70 different vehicles on that road. So safety and usage is definitely a big issue with that road, and I'm quite concerned with the crossover between industry and tourism, and that everybody can stay safe.
Thank you, Director Bales. Do I see Director Alexis there? Go ahead, Director Alexis.
Thank you. It's echoing some of the same problems. I saw video footage of our Forest Service Road where not only vehicles had parked on one side, making it impossible to pass any oncoming vehicle, but we also had tents set up all the way up the road, which I've never seen. People camping on the road of a Forest Service road, just off to the side. It was absolute pandemonium. So we are putting in some additional RCMP overtime just to help, and of course conservation's there, but we were absolutely slammed on the weekend. So we're having a meeting tomorrow to take a look at measures for the next weekend, because I have a feeling we're going to be doing this for the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Alexis. Director Stobart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things. One, glad to see the Fraser River down below 4 meters at the Mission Gauge, and things getting somewhat back to normal. And a lot of our lower level blueberry farmers are actually going to be able to get in and get their crops off now, so that's good. On a sadder note, Norm Harris, who was one of the founding members of the North Fraser Fire Department, passed away a couple weeks back at the ripe old age of 102. And again, somebody that's been known in the community for, I think, 91 years. So sorely missed, and just wanted to say thank you for everything that he's done, that he did over the years.
Thank you, Director Stobart. Any other reports from board members? Director Popov.
No, I just wanted to reach out and thank Director Dixon for all her work. I know it's been a huge challenge. I've been in a lot of conversations with our people at City Hall, and the backup up at the lake, causes backup into Yarrow and into Vetter Crossing as well. So let's keep working together here and see if we can find some solutions to the problem. It's like Director Alexis said, it's going to be here for another 3 weeks, I think. And yeah, it is a problem, but I do thank you for your work.
Thank you, Director Popov. Any discussion or any other reports from board members? Don't see any. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So next item is public question period for items relevant to the agenda, as we have been sending out email submissions requests to the community. We have also advertised the opportunity for members of the public to call in. And as I understand it, we do have 2 members of the public on the line this evening for items relevant to the agenda. So I'll just turn it over to our corporate officer, Ms. Riley.
Ms. Riley, go ahead.
Thank you. So as mentioned, we have opened up the opportunity for electronic participation to the public on our Zoom meeting. And I understand we do have 2 members of the public on the line tonight. So for the members of the public that are waiting, please note that I will be bringing you into the meeting one at a time, and that you will be given an opportunity to ask a question relevant to the agenda. Until you're admitted, you won't be able to speak to the board, but as soon as you are admitted, you can unmute yourself and state your name and speak your question. For our directors, I will note that when we do admit the member of the public to the meeting, you won't be able to see them, but they will be able to hear and see you. So I'll ask our admin team to send in the first person into our meeting. I understand we have a Kelly Mendonca on the line. And so Kelly, you can unmute yourself and state your name and address and ask your question relevant to the agenda.
Go ahead, Mr. Mendonca, the floor is yours. So I see Kelly, but I see there's that he's still muted. So is there any way that our staff or technical staff can unmute?
So I understand Kelly must unmute him or herself in order to speak their question. And if they're unable to do so, we do have the opportunity for members of the public to call in if they're having technical difficulty, and we will move to that portion shortly after we have the second person speak. So Kelly, if you're watching and you would like to speak, just unmute yourself. So move on to the second caller. We have a Pedro Peterson. If you want to unmute yourself and state your name and address and your question related to
sorry, my name is Pedro Pedersen. I just came to Zoom just to witness the meeting. I don't have any question. I'm the one that proposed forward the proposed regarding the LC at Bridal for the paragliding section. Just wanted to know what the motion was going to pass or not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pedersen, and thank you for observing the meeting. Are there any other questions, Ms. Riley?
No, there's no other members of the public on our public Zoom meeting, but this would be the opportunity for the public to call into the 702-5480 number. Now there is about a 45-second delay, so we'll just maybe have everybody mute themselves for about 2 or 3 minutes, and this will allow the members of the public an opportunity to call in.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'm getting the go-ahead from the corporate officer. So it appears that we have no other questions for item 18. So we would move down to item 19, was looking for a resolution to close the meeting.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Facio and seconded by Director Ross. All in favor, opposed if any item carries, and we'll give staff an opportunity to close the meeting.